This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended to replace professional medical advice or be a substitute for therapy. Please contact a mental health professional as needed. If you are needing urgent or emergency health care, contact your mental health provider, call 911, or go to your nearest emergency room. The information presented in this podcast also does not reflect the opinions of those with whom we may be affiliated, both past and present.
Good morning and welcome to another episode of I Wish I Had the Balls. And this morning we have the honor of welcoming Paul Sheasley, who's a psychotherapist and executive coach in Washington, D.C.
I'm so happy to be here with Paul and with you. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's been a good week.
Has it?
Yeah, my wife's out of town visiting her parents.
Don't tell her that.
Not that makes it a good week, but it's been a very. I've gotten a lot done this week.
You look tan. Have you done some tanning?
No, but I've done a lot of stuff outside, long dog walks, things like that. I mounted a new hose type of thing outside and washed the car.
Very well rested.
I thank you. I feel good. I feel good.
Good.
Yeah,
so I'm really happy to have our guest with us today.
Yeah.
Paul Sheasley is a psychotherapist and executive performance coach who works at the intersection of high performance and deep psychological insight. I love that already. I have 1,000 questions about that. He specializes in helping high net worth individuals, entrepreneurs, and senior executives break free from the unconscious patterns that quietly run their lives. Patterns like codependency, chronic people-pleasing, emotional avoidance, and self-sabotage disguised as ambition. That's a good one. With a background in clinical psychology and advanced training in schema therapy, Paul brings a rare depth to psychological treatment and executive coaching. His work goes far beyond productivity hacks or surface-level advice. Thank goodness there's a coach who goes deep, right?
Yeah, Paul, where were you when I was like in third grade? I needed you starting then.
I don't think I was around yet.
Oh, that hurts. Okay.
He helps his clients uncover the core beliefs and emotional blueprints that were formed early in life, beliefs that continue to shape how they lead, love, and relate to themselves. Welcome, Paul. We are so happy to have you here.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here, Paul. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I am really excited to be here. So ready to make the magic happen.
Awesome.
I love that. Oh my gosh, we're resonating already. The energy is amazing. I'm an energy person in spite of being like a scientist also. I believe they coexist. So let's make some magic today.
Yeah.
So Mark.
Paul has great energy, and Paul and I met in Washington, D.C. And as some of you know, that I'm a former Washingtonian, really a former New Yorker, but I lived in Washington for 22 years. And what I can tell you, and this is from my mouth, it's not Paul's, but everybody in Washington, D.C. is important. And everybody, it's funny because every geographic has its thing, right? If you're in LA, it's who you know in the movie business or, dropping stars' names. In Florida, it's the car you drive and the kind of the prestige. But in DC, it's where'd you go to school. It's a different kind of snobbery. It's a different kind of keeping up with the Jones. Where'd you go to school? Where'd you, what firm you with? So it's like that uber educated, how are you recycling enough? Are you, what are you doing? Totally different from South Florida. So, yeah, it's great to have you. Paul and I had a chance to meet when I was in Washington, D.C. About 6 months ago. And then Paul came down and visited us at J. Flowers and we had a great time. And he was a lovely part of the group. And I've been thinking about this, Paul. It seems to me, and I'm a codependent. I have been my whole life. And I've said this before that, what drove me into my recovery was substances, but really now that I've gotten to know myself and I starting to understand my own story 2 generations back and the whole thing, it's really my thing is codependency. I'm codependent. I've lived my life thinking other people would be happier if I were a better person. And I seem to attract codependence counterdependence. I actually looked that up. What would you call I came up with counterdependence. I seem to attract them, or I seem to be attracted to them. And you've said the same thing, Laura. Paul, why is that? What's going on with us that we're like narcissists?
Oh my God, narcissists love me.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's like I just should wear a sign here.
Yeah.
Any narcissist, please apply. Like
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
just flock over here. And I've gotten very good, at learning how to recognize. And that's where I think the important work, not only about mindset, which is a lot of what I do, and it sounds like that's what you do too, but also digging deep inside of yourself and feeling the emotion to recognize not just the thought pattern that's going on, but connecting the feeling to it also. Because some people are very cerebral, some people are very emotion based, and maybe connecting both. But I love Mark's question is, dude, why can't we break this pattern?
It is. It's such a powerful dynamic. It's one that I see both clinically in clinical settings as well as executive coaching environments. And the codependent and the counterdependent, they often find each other, as you described, as like almost magnetically. And it's really their wounds, the way that they cope, they really complement each other in ways that actually feel quite familiar, but then often lead to dysfunction. And, that the codependency piece, from what I see, is that, there's that excessive kind of fixation on others, someone who really gains their sense of self, of value, of worth, through caretaking, through pleasing, and over functioning in relationships, right? And then you've got the counterdependent. Mark, that word is actually it makes sense because counterdependence, they're the opposite. They tend to fear that intimacy,
a counterweight.
Their independence is quite extreme. They avoid the vulnerability, and they're often emotionally unavailable in their partnerships. And so that's when you really start to get that push-pull phenomenon happening.
But they're so good at selling themselves up front. They're, in the beginning of a relationship. I've never had a romantic relationship with a narcissist, but I've had business relationships and just, other relationships with these types of people. And I don't want to overuse the word narcissist. I know it's becoming really played out. Yeah. But they're really good at, they're so charming and so attractive and it's typically other men for me in business relationships or friendships. And then I realize, God, this person, I'm doing what I call dancing. I'm tap dancing. I'm in that, get into that shame and shameless mix. And I'm like, I got to get out of this. And I think the ability to recognize this early, the earlier you recognize it and say, I've seen this before. Let me stop myself. How do I get out of it? How do we do that? What are the tools? What do people need to know?
It's tough. It really is. I mean, and it's not to split hairs, the narcissist versus counterdependence, also known as avoidant attachment style, and codependency, also known as like anxious attachment style. These are concepts that are really important to differentiate, especially during the education process when working with folks who are struggling with these types of expressions, because it really allows them to put a name and an understanding to what's going on in their lives, because they're all responding to similar wounds that stem from earlier parts of life. And one of the catchphrases I'll often use is, you weren't born yesterday. And just statistically, when I'm working with couples, for example, they're generally 6 to 7 years late for therapy. And even before then, it's expressed in earlier relationships. And so, that codependent grew up potentially in that inconsistent emotional space where they had to learn to overcompensate to acquire love. And the counterdependent, they potentially grew up in an environment where vulnerability was not safe. And so I'll often use that word subjugation, where, there was a concept of fear or conflict if they expressed themselves. And so they really learned to self-soothe through distance and control. And so in essence, they're both fearing abandonment, and it's helping folks to understand the core needs and to even get away from those labels, because nobody wants to be labeled, and we don't want to be the label. We want to understand what's behind these ways of thinking, behaving, feeling that are really related to these core unmet needs.
Yeah. What's driving this? A couple of thoughts. I mean, one is that, we don't want to go too much to the other side where, if you're someone who's trying to get into a relationship, looking for a partner, where you're labeling everybody a narcissist at the first move, because you may rule out a lot of people because everybody's got some narcissistic or counter-dependent or avoidant.
Wait. Unless you're in South Florida, because South Florida is all narcissists. I don't know about D.C., but South Florida is flooded with them.
Yeah, D.C.
With a good tan, I mean, it takes away.
Yeah. No, I think narcissists are they're prevalent everywhere. The other thing is that when I think back and I think one of the reasons I've been attracted to narcissists is because I think, and these have been business relationships, and I think that it's because I tend to gravitate towards partners that I think my parents would approve of. Like they'd be like, "Oh, I like him. He's strong, he's smart. It's like almost like I'm bringing home a boyfriend." But that doesn't work. I mean, that you resent it, you're angry, But
at first it does. It really does, right? Because especially if we're talking about the codependent, the counter-dependent, or even the narcissist, they come off as very confident, very independent. There's glimpses of emotional strength there. They can feel quite grounding.
Yeah.
Why do you think? I mean, attachment theory has been around since John Bowlby, right? Like a long time ago. Why do you think attachment theory has all of a sudden gotten so hot?
We're doing it. Podcasts. I mean, when you think about the bloom of social media, and even just like myself, just getting into PR and putting content out there, just the flood of therapists just talking about it. And I also think that generationally, there's a more comfortability in talking about oneself. And I think that just kind of comes with it, the comfortability of talking about mental health, talking about relationships, people seeking out therapy, getting help for these, kind of these once, I guess, really judged or sense of judgment coming forward and seeking help. So I think it's just a combination of things.
One of the things that I also wonder about that, and you would know this being a psychotherapist, there's a difference between doing therapy with someone and doing coaching. Two totally different approaches, which I want to definitely hear your take on. But I notice in our quick and easy kind of world, people just want a simple explanation and let's fix it. So it's like, oh, there you go, anxious attachment. So let's go ahead and fix that, and then everything will be done. Or I'm an avoidant, or whatever.
Yeah.
And you can label it, but you still got to do the work.
You still have to do the work.
Yeah, you still have to peel back the layers. It's taken me years and years. One of the things I still have a tendency to do, but less. I mean, I think maturity and experience does provide some kind of extraction for this, because you realize, kind of been through this before, and, jumping through hoops or whatever it is, or being, Johnny on the spot all the time doesn't necessarily buy you what you think it does. But I can definitely recall, a lot of times in my life in relationships where the phone rings, I see their name come up, and I'm doing an inventory right away. Did I do this? Did I do that? Is this, what am I in trouble for? And I think that goes back to my early childhood. I was always on the hook for something in my early childhood, and I think those habits, they die hard.
So I hope when I call you, it's not an eye roll and you're not calling Paul and being like, I got to do an inventory of everything that's going on before I talk to her.
Paul, Laura's calling and I'm about to have an anxiety attack. No, I don't. Not at all. I wouldn't be, one of the things I love about you is this is so easy. And talking to someone like Paul is so easy and so natural. And I think that's what attracted me to this field too. Nobody gets into the behavioral health space for no reason. Nobody just says, maybe people that get their MD in psychiatry but I find there's always a driver. Somebody always has a personal experience that has said, I'm going to do this. This is attractive to me.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. So Paul, do you know anybody who has secure attachment besides you?
So, basing that question off of even a bit of what, Mark, you were referring to, I think it's dynamic. I think that there's varying degrees of feelings of codependency or counterdependency or secure. But if we were to look at it from that very clinical lens, I guess one would say that it's quite boxed in. Like, your secure attachment, your anxious attachment, your avoidant attachment, your secure avoidant, et cetera. But I don't look at people in boxes, and you really cannot do that because there are moments of security from an avoidant or anxious attachment person that is so important when working with folks because, we're highlighting those secure moments and saying, how does this feel compared to how this felt? How did this behavior look to your partner or to yourself versus this behavior? And I think we can grow into security. And so I don't think there's a boxed in way. I think we should not box in people when we look at these attachments, but rather help them to grow into the secure, although we all have setbacks and we can't undo our past. We don't have a time machine. The best that we can do is change our conclusions about the past and how they are triggered in the present and how we then deal with them and relate to them to really focus on those core needs being met.
I think that's a really good point is, when you're working with someone or even looking at yourself, there are moments when you are in a secure attachment or you're having a secure attachment interaction with someone. So it's not all or nothing.
Yeah.
So being able to focus on what you're already doing that's working.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And the magic that I'm, as an executive coach and a clinician is I've been able to bring, as you had mentioned to the audience, my schema work, right? Which has significant roots in attachment. And how does that show up in the executive world, right? And, through schema coaching, I've been able to put together an assessment and evaluation, helping folks to understand, well, how does my sense of abandonment or fear of abandonment or fear of conflict or fear of being rejected show up in my organization? And, there's been enough work to support that for me in my endeavor. Just to give a quick example, I'd worked with an executive a person part of an executive team who had sold some software to another company. And it was brilliant. It was brilliant software. They loved what he had created. But the company had reached out to the executive and said, we don't want that developer on the team. And there was many reasons for that, and specifically this person's reluctance to lead. And coming in and working with this individual, there was roots in conflict avoidance and fear of rejection and failure that really inhibited this person from showing up and showing their great work and helping another company for them to merge and being a part of that team. And through some of that schema work, that attunement and attachment work, we were able to actually make some big strides in his presentation, but more importantly, how he felt about himself and how he felt in relationships.
Yeah. When I have been in these situations, and I'm a fairly self-aware person, I've done a lot of work, and in a leadership position, and I'm also but codependent. I know I'm not doing the people I'm leading a favor. I know it's breeding insecurity in them too, for me to be like, instead of leading, but I'm asking them their permission. And, and I'm the boss. And why am I doing that? And all those things. I mean, it was because I was in this relationship. But, one thing I think that codependency leads to is lying for survival. I mean, not major lies. I mean, not, but you're just so afraid.
Yeah.
You're predicting how the other person's going to react, how they're going to feel. And so you just want to tell them what they want to know. And that's another recipe for disaster. It just comes back and bites you in the ass later.
Yeah. I mean, even just depriving themselves of honesty, to lie, to please the partner, just to stop the chaos even, right? The what I call the get through moment, whatever it takes just to reclaim that connection.
Right.
Often will lead to resentment and anger because they're constantly sacrificing something that they don't want to, which is their own truth. So absolutely.
Yeah.
So the people-pleasing lies I find are pretty dominant when you're dealing with someone who is just afraid of somebody else's reaction. But also, do you ever work with people, Paul, on just the concept of, yes, your truth, but also maybe it's not part of your identity or your value system to lie. And so how do you feel about then having to identify yourself as a liar, even though it's not for any sort of sociopathic reason.
Right.
It's just because you're trying to get out of trouble.
Right. You're afraid of the consequences.
Yeah, absolutely. And to flip that, let's talk about the counterdependent and lying is showing up inauthentically to please like the other partner, which is so draining. And that often occurs, the lying, because there's no safe space for honesty and connection through conflict. And that's one of the when I work with folks, I tell people, I say, conflict is really important. And I like when couples are in conflict and they kind of look at me like, what's wrong with you? When we disconnect and reconnect, we're establishing trust. And that is one of the core issues that I find with counterdependence and codependence is that they don't have that healthy dance. And so they're often walking on the eggshells, as we refer to.
Yeah.
They're showing up inauthentically so that the atmosphere around them feels safe. And they're still not meeting those needs. And so I'll often I'll say, what is this thing right here about? And they've got a great rationale for it. It's because that's what she wants. That's what he wants. And what I get from that is this. And I say, how much of it do you get? And they go, just a little bit. And I go, and that's enough, isn't it? And they go, yeah. And I go, how's that working out for you? And they go, not it's not working out for me.
Right.
And so that's where, especially when I'm working with the couple, we're able to have that narrative. And then even individually, that's where we're starting to look at setting boundaries. A lot of the uncomfortable stuff, like Mark, you talked about, that inner work and sticking with it, because it gets hard.
You bring up a good point, and that is the conflict, being in conflict, disconnecting, and being able to come back together comfortably or safely. I often use the analogy with people that your emotions are like a muscle. And if you don't use that muscle regularly, it's weak. And when you practice using that muscle, like I'll be at the gym and I'll see somebody doing something difficult. Can I do that? No, I can't do it. The answer is yes, I can if I practice it. If I do it enough, I can. And I think that therapy and an emotional stability and being comfortable in one's own skin is a question of good habits, is practicing decision making, practicing being secure. Yeah.
So Paul, would you have someone jump in right away and do the biggest feared thing on their list? Or would you have someone practice like what Mark is saying, setting a boundary with the guy who always makes your coffee the wrong way and you're afraid to say anything? Like, would you almost do it like hierarchical so someone can work up to the toughest one? Or is your strategy like, let's go big or go home?
Yeah.
We may role play that in the office as a test, which can be quite revealing and also helpful to the individual of like, wow, I'm not ready for that. But it's a slow grow process, and the coaching world as well as the clinical world. And there's a lot of assessment that takes place. There's a relationship that has to build between me and that person. Because if I'm going to be asking you to do something scary and vulnerable and you don't know me, it's not going to happen. It's too much. They're going to abandon ship. Mm-hmm. And so, there's this, it's a engagement. There's the motivational piece. I'm like, we'll go with the muscle analogy. I'm looking at the tone of their muscles. I'm like, all right, I think you can do this. I think you can do that. Let's build up to this. So, I'm definitely not having people jump into things right away because they're like, why'd you do this to me? And I want them to be able to have these successes in session before we start doing the bigger stuff outside of the appointments.
And as a therapist, you have to be careful, because if you go too hard or too much, or there's too much mirroring or too much truth, they go away. Yeah. You can lose them. And as an interventionist, what's different from me is it's also a delicate dance, but I have a shorter amount of time to build rapport and get and have an effect, a change. But I also too want to be careful not to shut anybody down.
Right.
Because I'm walking into the room 5 minutes ago, they didn't know me in an intervention. And now I'm asking them to leave their family, get in the car with me, get on a plane with me, and to trust me. And that's a heavy ask now that I think about it. And by the way, and also change their complete, what's going on in their life. And but it is interesting as a therapist, you have to have much more patience. It's more time. It's gradual rapport building than what I'm typically used to.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What do you see going on now? What are there's a lot that's changed. I left Washington about 8 years ago, and it was nutty then too. It was it always has been. I mean, it always been hyper political, hyper everything, but now even more so. And things are different today. And I'm not necessarily asking a political question, but I've seen even here with people that are being affected in a way that's never been the case before. I don't think when I was in college or when I was in high school that this divide, this you're with me or against me type of mentality existed, and now it does. And are you seeing that with your clients? What are you seeing?
Life is dynamic, whether it's familial, occupational, political, community. And one of the concepts that, so the answer to your question, yes, there has been a climate change as far as the conversation and the content that comes into the office, organizationally as well as the private practice. The one thing, it's interesting because the way that I approach it is through the process. I'm like, there's always going to be content. There's always going to be something that goes on in our lives, not just once or twice, multiple times, where how we are equipped to deal with that is really what's important. And so many folks will come wanting to talk about the content, and I go, okay, I hear how this is affecting you.
Right.
I hear how this dynamic has shifted
not really
things
about
in your life. Let's go back to our process and how we work through it. Mm-hmm. And so the process is what I go right back to, and so a lot of folks think that I'm inundated with these more global conversations, but if I did that, I wouldn't be helping people. We'd we would just be having a conversation, and that's not what I'm about, and that's not what people expect from me.
And it's interesting because I've run into a few people recently where they're picking their counselors, their therapists based on their camp. Mm-hmm. And my feeling is you got to be careful with that, because if I'm being honest with myself, I don't want to sit with a therapist that is just going to validate my nonsense. I need to be told, it's not that. Right, like you said, it's not about the content. It's why is the content bothering you? What's going on? What is this? What's there? And I wouldn't want to send someone who was one way or another to a therapist that had strong political leanings. In DC, it's very hard to escape, but more so globally now too. So I want to be aware of our time. I think are we there?
We have a couple of minutes. I have a quick question for you, Paul. When someone comes to you, do they know what they want? So if someone comes to you and says, I want coaching, do you ever say to them, oh man, this guy needs some therapy. Like, we can't even do the coaching yet. Like, how do you, when you're running like a practice that focuses on both, how do you make that decision and explain it to people?
I think that's really an experiential dance from years of wisdom and working with thousands of people, is introducing based on what they're coming to me for and saying, look, you're coming to me for this, and we've really discovered this. What do you think about that? And then, I'm often leading people to making their own decision, and I'm just offering up the opportunity for them to pick. And more often than not, they will go, oh, wow, really? Yes, I think we should work on this. And so they're really making the informed choice, and I'll set those boundaries and expectations. They may say, well, no, I don't want to do that. I want to do this. This is why I'm here. And say, okay, this is what we can expect if we leave this component out, if we don't work on this part. That's a great way to say it.
That's because people do come into therapy saying, I want to focus on this, forget that. Mm-hmm. And they want to, it's like people who go to the doctor saying, I need you to write me a prescription for XYZ twice a day, but that's interesting. I like the way you said that understood and respect that, just so if we leave this piece out, here's what to expect. That's a brilliant
like
way
if we
to
talk about
that.
Burnout and if they use excessive alcohol, but they don't want to talk about the alcohol, or whether it's something about their relationship that's affecting some other component of their lives. And it's like, well, wait a minute. We just skipped over this huge piece that's really bringing up a lot of things for you and actually quite distracting. How do you see this being a success without addressing this? And I'll put that question back on them. And if they can't answer it, I'll say, well, then maybe we should try and maybe do a little bit of both. But the truth will come out as we keep working together.
I love that. I love that approach. So Paul, before we wrap, just quick question: What are your influences, or who are your influences? What book maybe has had a great influence on you? What podcast do you listen to besides this one?
Yes.
Yeah. So, like, where do you go when you need inspiration?
Wow. That's such a interesting question. Definitely put on the spot for that, because I am a nerd at heart, and there is not one source that I am pulling from. Somebody will say this podcast, I'll say, great, listen to it once. Maybe another one, listen to that once. I mean, I've got 6 or 7 books on my nightstand that each get a page of love. Then I'm moving on to the next book, or just continuing with education. And so there's really not one source, because I can't sit still to dedicate, I think, to one source. So I just find myself being pulled in a lot of directions, and I'm just absorbing as much as I can.
Like you're a parent, you're a professional, you've got your own personal life, you got to take care of yourself. Life takes up a lot of time. I mean, getting to work, getting to, just putting out the fires and doing maintenance on a day-to-day basis. The day goes very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Paul Sheasley, it's been a real pleasure to have you today. So amazing. Great conversation. Where can people reach out to you if they want to contact you for executive coaching or psychotherapy, whichever you guys decide?
Sure. So for the executive coaching, EPC leadership. And then as far as the clinical counseling, that's Paul Sheasley, lcpc.com.
Awesome.
Wonderful.
I love it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us today. You're really fantastic. It's such a pleasure to get to know you. And I love what you're doing on social media. Very classy. I just sent one of your memes to the person that does some of my social media. So I really like this look. It's classy. It's very clean, the signature and everything. So thank you so much for being here. And I hope to connect with you soon.
Yeah, I hope we get to collaborate again in the future. Thank you. And don't forget, guys, to tune in for the very next episode of I Wish I Had the Balls with Mark Cantor and Dr. Laura Ellick.
Dr. Laura Ellick.
Have a good one, guys.
Thank you.